It is my honor to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, Sister Helen Prejean. Born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Sister Helen Prejean is many things. She's a member of the Congregation of St. Joseph, an educator, and a best-selling author. And she's one of the nation's leading advocates for the abolition of the death penalty. Sister Helen began her prison ministry in 1981. While living in New Orleans' St. Thomas Housing Project, she became pen pals with Patrick Sonnier. Sonnier had been convicted for killing 2 teens, a crime for which he was sentenced to death in the electric chair in Louisiana's Angola State Prison. Sonnier asked Sister Helen to begin visiting him as a spiritual advisor, and she did. Her eyes were open to the execution process in Louisiana. Sister Helen would turn these experiences into a book called Dead Man Walking, an eyewitness account to the death penalty. Published in 1993, Dead Man Walking was a #1 on the New York Times bestseller for 31 weeks. It was translated into 10 languages and became an international bestseller. In 1996, Dead Man Walking was developed into an acclaimed major motion picture starring Susan Sarandon as Sister Helen and Sean Penn as a death row inmate. It was nominated for 4 Oscars. Since then, Sister Helen and Dead Man Walking have been the subject of many media stories. Her extraordinary story has even been made into an opera. 15 years after her crusade began, Sister Helen has witnessed 5 executions in Louisiana. Today, she travels the country educating the public about the death penalty through her speaking, writing, and organizing. She founded a victims advocacy group in New Orleans called Survive, and she continues to counsel inmates on death row, as well as the families of the murder victims. Sister Helen has served on the board of the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. She is a member of Amnesty International and an honorary member of Murder Victim Families for Reconciliation. Presently, Sister Helen is the honorary chairperson for the Moratorium Campaign, a group gathering signatures for a worldwide moratorium on the death penalty. In 2000, she helped Kofi Annan, Secretary General of the UN, with 2.5 million signatures from all over the world, calling for a moratorium of the death penalty. She is an inspiration to us all, and it is a privilege to have us here with this evening. And she has been a hero of mine ever since I heard her speak at the Ignatian Family Teach-In in 2006. So we are so honored to welcome Sister Helen Prejean.
Maybe the first bridge is the bridge to our own hearts that the Holy Spirit of God, when we get awakened. And when you think about it, we can't wake ourselves up. Enlightenment or awakening in any spiritual tradition is about suddenly we get it. Something flashes. St. Bonaventure said, don't ask for knowledge. Ask for the fire. Because when we catch on fire, then we are transformed. It took me a while to get it about social justice. I didn't have anything like an Ignatian Teach-In when I was in high school or college. The spirituality we were learning was much more, it was about being close to God, but it wasn't about justice. I had to awaken to justice. It took me a while to awaken to justice. And what I love about this Pope, Francis, when you read his story, it took him a while to awaken to justice. He was on the other side of things when the Jesuits took a turn through their general, Pedro Arrupe, to move toward justice. He was on the other side when liberation, theology first awakened, and he was in Argentina. He wasn't there. He didn't get it. He was put in authority at a young age, and he was very authoritarian. Here's what the rules say. Here's what the doctrine says. Here's what the church is about. And even in the case of two young Jesuits who wanted to go live in the slums, he forbade them to do it. They went anyway. They felt the gospel was calling them to live among the poor, and he dismissed them. And it was in Argentina during the time when it was called the Dirty War, where people were being disappeared and they were being tortured. And those two young guys were put into a place of torture for 6 months. And when in his first interview after he got to be Pope, when they said, "Who is Jorge Bergoglio?" he said, "I am a sinner." And he started talking about mercy. Because it's in God's mercy, through the people God sends us, we begin to wake up. And he went through a very dark period where he was basically exiled out of the country, sent to another country to get a PhD. That's the way the Jesuits exile you. They send you to go get a PhD. But it was a real dark, dark time for him, and they even had to monitor his phone calls when he would call back to Buenos Aires, because he would start fights. People were either for him or against him. It was a source of great division. And so for 2 dark years, he was trying to make his way, and he'd walk along this river in this little town of Cordoba with basically no mission, nothing, just a prayer, trying to sort his way of what God was calling him to do. And then this archbishop in Buenos Aires, who knew him, invited him to come back to Buenos Aires and to be an auxiliary bishop. And the Jesuits were saying, no, don't let him have authority. He doesn't know how to handle authority. And he moved into the slums with the poor. And he will tell you this, he says this, "They taught me." He visited them in their homes. He rode with them on the bus. And after 18 years of doing that, he was known as the Bishop of the Slums. And then he bought his ticket to Rome to go for the election of the Pope. He had a round-trip ticket. It ended up he didn't use the other half of the ticket. And when I heard this and saw that when he came to that balcony where you usually give the blessing to the world, he bowed his head and he asked people to pray for him. That is our Holy Father, our leader now, and he's teaching us all. My own story, in a way, is similar in that it took me a long time to wake up that it was more than about being charitable. And see, in a way, Christianity's gotten really comfortable for us. You know, we go to Mass, and we belong to our parishes, and we belong to the church. But most of us have health care. Most of us have a really good education. Most of us have been given so much. And my awakening happened, and it was grace, because it's in the first part of Dead Man Walking, because it changed the spiritual trajectory of my life. And when something happens to us where we get it, and it sticks with us, it's not a little passing thing, oh yeah, I got this great insight on a retreat, maybe I'll do this. And it was about Jesus. And truthfully, I'd gone to this conference about Jesus, and I wasn't too happy about this conference. We all were bussed up to Terre Haute, Indiana. We were like captive. We all went to this conference, and it was on social justice. And I'd been one of the big speakers in the community that was saying, we are nuns. We're not social workers. What's the deal with all this social justice stuff? I'm not going to get involved. I'm not getting involved with politics. I'm spiritual. I transcend politics. And I pray for the world. And these big problems, that's God's problem. You pray to God. God takes care of the poor people. We're only one little person. And here was this nun, Maria Augusta Neal. For 3 days we captive. We caught. We had to stay in these dormitories. This is the summer. The girls are away from St. Mary of the Woods. So the first day, when Sister Maria Augusta Neal talked, and I said, well, maybe with God's grace I can get through all this, man. We're not going to become politicians. We nuns and all this social justice stuff. And the first day I came through unscathed. And then she announced the next day she's going to talk about Jesus. I said, bring on Jesus. I know Jesus. I had studied scripture at Notre Dame. I had made Ignatian retreats. I knew how to do discernment like Ignatius taught us. I knew about Jesus. What's she going to tell us about Jesus? And I'll tell you the line. And I'm sitting just like you sitting. And see, we never know when this awakening happens within our hearts. And she said, Jesus preached good news to the poor. I had read that. How many times had I read that? And I knew all about Matthew 25. You know, I was hungry, he gave me to eat. I was thirsty, he gave me to drink. I was a stranger, he took me in. I was a prisoner, he came to me. And whenever I'd come to that line about the prison thing, you know, we all our own little spin doctors with those scriptures. Because I'd say, oh, well, yeah, you know, like if you shy, that's kind of like being in prison. I didn't think it meant go to prison. I mean, really. And then, and so when she said, Jesus preached good news to the poor, I thought I knew what she was going to say next, about how every hair of our head is numbered, how loved we are by God, like not a sparrow falls to the ground without Abba, God so close we can call God Daddy. And all of that is true. But what Sister Maria Augusta Neal said was integral to the good news that Jesus preached to poor people is that they would be poor no longer. It was not God's will for them to be poor. And I realized that I had been glorifying suffering. Well, they're poor and their children are dying and they don't have health care, but they're suffering with Christ on the cross, and one day they'll have a great reward in heaven. But I didn't know any really poor people. I lived in the suburbs of New Orleans, and I was a DRE. I was doing good stuff. But I didn't really know any poor people, and I didn't know what they're suffering. We had 10 major housing projects in New Orleans, and I'd never been to any of them. I said, well, if any of the sisters, they feeling called to go work with the poor, well, go work with the poor. But I didn't feel any call to go work with the poor. I don't know the poor. Kind of like this little girl that wrote this essay one time. The name of the essay was The Poor Family. She said once there was a very poor family. The mother was poor. The father was poor. The children were poor. The chauffeur was poor. The gardener was poor. I could have written the essay. And when I awakened, integral to the good news to poor people was the community Jesus formed. And we did this for 300 years till Constantine came and our religion became more of an institution, that we formed a community in such a way that no one was in need. And then I began to think of it, that the theology I had heard and the theology I'd learned, it is not God's will for some people to be poor. And here again we have our Pope Francis. We got to tackle the economics of things. I mean, it's really figuring in now as we're beginning to see the end of the death penalty in the United States, because we are waking up. It's happening. Because of people like you, because of us, because we're waking up the people about what it means to take a human being who's done a crime and take them out and kill them. And the stories are all getting out now. Well, what about the guards now that have to do the killing for us? What about the wardens who have to take a human being, render them defenses, take them out and kill them? Oh, but the Supreme Court says it's okay. Oh, but for a long time we never thought about it. I never thought about it. I wasn't awake about it. And then when I heard, because of the budget crunches in the states, that the costliness of the death penalty is one of the factors. That's the reason why states are beginning to shut down the death penalty. It made me sad. And I said, oh man, to think that money's going to be the thing, and people are going to say, I don't want to be spending all my tax dollars on executing people, and we can put them in prison. And then I remembered Martin Luther King had said, a budget is a moral document. And the way we spend our resources for life or death makes a huge difference. Everything needs to be filled with the Spirit of God, the way we spend our money, the way we do our economics. How is it that in the United States of America, we have simply allowed that we will have 42 million people who are poor? We seem to, in fact, sometimes I think we even blame poor people for being poor. Why don't they get out their duff, send their kids to school? What those people need to do is, don't they know? They need to get a job. They need to have intact families. What is with those people? And so my waking up, when I left that conference with Maria Augusta Neal, I did a simple action, but it was very direct. I moved into the St. Thomas housing projects in New Orleans, and African American people became my teacher. I didn't even know the word white privilege. I didn't even know I was privileged. I just simply thought everybody acted like we did. I didn't know what it was to be a young black man and how you're treated by the police in St. Thomas. I wasn't scared of policemen. If my car had broken down on the highway and a state trooper had pulled behind me, I'd be glad. Help's on the way. And every young man in the St. Thomas Housing Project had had a negative experience with the police. It was a pattern. It's not to say every policeman's racist, but when you begin to see patterns, you know, the definition of intelligence is not the ability to know a whole lot of facts so you can win every trivial pursuit game. Knowing facts, computers can get the facts for us, and if you got an iPhone, you can Google them up and get every fact you want right in your hand. Intelligence has to do with the ability to see relationships between things. And so all the rules were different. I mean, kids coming into the Adult Learning Center, I'd gone to St. Joseph Academy. I'd gone to St. Mary's Dominican. I went and got my master's degree in religious education. I studied theology. Kids are coming into the Adult Learning Center in New Orleans that have been to the public schools and got as far as junior year, and they couldn't read a third grade reader. And when I experienced this, I just went, I've been so removed. And it's not that I was bad, it's just that I wasn't awake. And God awakened me, and I met people with courage who were holding down 2 jobs. I met mothers who feared every time there was a gunshot, they'd come to the door and say, where's my child? Because they couldn't afford to pay rent in another part of the city. And we have allowed all this to go on. And it's while I was there, coming out of the Adult Learning Center one day, that a friend of mine was coming out of the Prison Coalition office and said, hey, Sister Helen. He had a little clipboard. Everybody he was meeting that day, he was asking them to be part of his little project, happened to bump into me. And this is the story, and part 1 of it is, the theme of it is, Jesus is sneaky. Because he goes, hey, Sister Helen, you want to be a pen pal, somebody on death row? And he was signing up everybody, and I went, yeah, sure, I could write some letters to somebody on death row. You know, I thought, I'm an English major. I could write some poems and stuff, you know. And this was the early 80s. We hadn't executed anybody in Louisiana in 20 years. I didn't know they were going to kill this person. I think I'm just going to be writing some letters. So I wrote the man a letter, Pat Saunier. And here was the problem. There's the bridge. He wrote back. And I wrote and he wrote. And I'm telling him about a Hope House. He's talking about life in a 6.5 foot by 8.5 foot cell. He didn't even ask me for anything. He was just so glad someone had found him. Somebody was writing to him. Somebody was praying for him. So then here's the encounter, reading the scriptures. It was the scripture of the day. That's the way I feed my prayer. I read the liturgy of the day, the scriptures of the day, and it was Matthew 25. I was in prison and you came to me. Boing, oing, 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 oing. You ever notice how sometimes you read the scriptures and sometimes the scriptures read us? And I wrote him a simple letter and I said, Pat, I'll come see you sometime. And he is so excited. In the return mail, he gave all the visitor forms, and here was Sneaky Jesus Part 2. Because he said, well, I'm a Catholic and you're a nun. When you be my spiritual advisor? And I put down spiritual advisor. I have no felonies. I filled in the paper and sent it in. And 2 years later, he's executed at midnight in the electric chair. At 5:45 in the evening, everybody's got to leave the death house except the spiritual advisor, who's me. And here's the thing I discovered about grace, and it's happening right now. Grace comes up under us as we need it, not ahead of time. And when God calls us, the grace comes up inside us to do whatever it is that love calls us to do. And it is always about love. Justice is just the minimum of love. And I met a man, and he and his brother in cold blood had murdered 2 young kids. And I make a terrible mistake. I had a great editor at Random House who told me, when I wrote the first draft of Dead Man Walking, I downplayed this mistake. And the mistake was when I found out that Eddie and Pat had killed these 2 teenage kids, and I thought about their parents, and I thought of reaching out to them, that I ought to do something. But I was afraid. I thought, they're not going to want to see me. I'm the spiritual advisor that killed their kids. And I stayed away from them. I didn't do anything. I didn't write a letter. I didn't call them. I didn't do anything. And my editor was looking. I downplayed that mistake, and he goes, well, Helen, that's a bad mistake. He said, it was cowardice, wasn't it? You were scared, weren't you? And I said, yeah, I was. And he said, look, when you write your book, don't just take people with you on the peaks of the waves. Take them in the troughs. And the hero of my book is the father of David LeBlanc, who was killed. We just had the anniversary of the death, November the 5th. We were just there, just that day. And he's the one who taught me how you can be thrown into the crucible of fire and lose your son and make your way through the anger, through the thoughts of revenge, over to a place where the integrity and love within him was not taken over by the hate. He's the hero. I'm the storyteller in Dead Man Walking, but this man is the hero. And I'll end with this, that when you remember that when we make the sign of the cross, it's a sign of execution, and Jesus was executed by the Romans, and there are 2 arms on that cross. The gospel of Jesus is always going to call us never to be polarized, to take one side or the other, but to be stretched between the two, which is the gift of reconciliation. Perpetrators on one arm of that cross. Where is Christ? Christ is with the perpetrator. Everybody's worth more than the worst thing they ever do in their life. Even those among us who have done a terrible crime have a dignity that must not be taken from them. Christ is there, and Christ is on the other arm of the cross with the victims. Do we really think that we tell victims' families to wait 10 years, 15 years, even 20 years, and then send a representative while the state or the federal government kills the one who kill their loved one, and they get to watch the violence, and that's supposed to heal them? Do we really believe that could ever heal a heart? I've learned from the victim's family. And this father of David said, he said, "Sister, people think forgiveness is weak, like you're condoning something." He said, "That's not the way I see it." But I had all those feelings of hatred inside me, and then I said, and he did his hand like this, and he said, and I said, they killed my son, but I'm not going to let them kill me. And he set his face to go down the road of the gospel, of what Jesus had said, and Grace met him on that road. And that's why I call him the hero. I'm just a storyteller, and I made some bad mistakes. So we're on the road together, and we do it together because we're in community. Can't do it alone. Don't last long alone. It's the community that bolsters us. It's the community that blows on the coals of our fire of our faith when they're getting low. Don't ask for knowledge. Ask for the fire. I sense the fire's here. Do you sense it? Thank you.